church look like? From heaven's perspective, what should we be doing here? Why are we here? What are we here for? And what are we supposed to be doing? The first week we talked about that specifically. What does God expect from the church at New Hope Baptist Church? What does He expect? And then last week we talked about the way that we should interact with one another, the way that we should treat one another, the way that we should talk to one another, and how love is the key ingredient. We have to have love because that's what identifies us as God's children. And so this week we're actually getting into a topic that is not widely popular, but it's necessary. It's necessary. So today what we're going to talk about is the church structure and the authority within the church. And so we'll start with talking about there's three different groups in the church. Well, four different groups in the church. There are members of the church, which are people who say, I believe what the church believes. I trust the leadership of the church. And so I come in here and I'm in agreement with, I want to serve, I want to work together, the members. There's also those who visit or who are non-believers or visitors who come in and aren't part of the body itself, but they come in whether they're visiting from church to church, finding a home, or they're just coming through, visiting out of town, something like that. There's also deacons, which is instituted in Acts, and that is, according to the name, means servants. They are the helpers of the elders, and they serve the church. The Bible also calls them ministers of mercy. And then the elders. The elders are the leaders of the church. They are the leadership team in the church. They are the ones who find the direction and lead the church in that way. And so authority is not something we all like. Authority is not something that most of us are eager to hear about, eager to submit to, but how necessary is it? You know, I look in our country, if you watch the news, I mean, we have laws, we have police organizations, we have things in place to hold order, but what's going on in our society? There's all kinds of things and crimes, all kinds of rebellion against authority. Without the authority in place, imagine where the world would be. You know, we hear about, and it's very distant from us, these other countries where there's anarchy or there's unrest, civil unrest, and there's nothing, anything goes. And it's so unhealthy. It's unhealthy for the civilization. It's unhealthy for everyone. And so in the church, we have to understand that there is authority. There is structure. There's a way that things should be. But before we go anywhere, we have to start at the top. Who is the ultimate authority? God. Right? And so let's look at, this is one of my favorite verses. And if you've been here for the past month or few months, we've been reading it almost every day. Psalms 115:3. It's one of my favorite texts, and really not because any reason other than it just reminds me of who I am and who He is. And sometimes that's what we need, is a reminder of who our God is. So Psalms chapter 115 and verse 3, it says, our God is in the heavens, He does all that He pleases. It's short and simple, but it makes a very bold statement. First, it defines where God is. He's in the heavens. It says He does whatever He wants to. How can He do that? Because He's God. He's God. See, He is, what the Bible says, is the sovereign of the universe. There's nothing anywhere in the universe that He can't come and stand over and say, that's mine. See, in James it says, every good gift and perfect present is from the Lord. So even the things in our lives, a lot of times that we take for granted, they're from Him. So He can stand over anything in our lives and say, that's mine. Little Jeremy, on the way home yesterday, he was telling me, he's like, Dad, God is telling me that He's creating new animals. And they're His animals, but He's creating them. And He wants us to take care of them. And I've been trying to talk to him about what the new kingdom will be like, and about, you know, how we won't have to be afraid of lions. And I told him he could ride a lion. He's like, you can ride it? I was like, not yet. Not yet. Don't jump the fence. Not yet. But he's got in his mind this idea. He's just like, man, that's awesome. So he tells me God's creating everything and He wants us to take care of it. But it's His. It's His. And see, and that's a mindset that we have to have. That everything is God's. Because of our society and the mentality here, we're real concerned about our rights. I have a right to say this. I have a right to say that. And if you watch the news or watch anything like that, even the criminals have rights. I mean, they get to say their part, do their thing, and then and it's so strange sometimes, the freedom of speech allows people to say some crazy things. But you can't infringe on their rights. Well, the thing that we have to understand about God is we have no rights. See, He's the ultimate authority. He stands over everything, says, this is all mine. And you know who learned that firsthand? There was a king named Nebuchadnezzar. And he learned it firsthand in Daniel chapter 4. And I want us to understand this because this is such a huge thing, but it's good. It's good, and I'll show you why. In Daniel chapter 4, starting in verse 34, Nebuchadnezzar has this grand moment. But just to give you some background, he was a great king of Babylon. Babylon was the world power, biggest kingdom at that time. He ruled a bunch of things. He built a bunch of stuff. And he had been warned by God about his pride. And so one day, Nebuchadnezzar stepped out on his balcony and he looked at all of his kingdom. And he said, look at this great kingdom that I myself have built. And it says, at that time, God says, your kingdom has departed from you. And he struck him with insanity. And so then it says Nebuchadnezzar was out in the fields like an animal. And he was like pushed away by people like he was an animal. It says his hair grew long, his fingernails grew long, and he was out there mentally unstable. And so finally he came back to, and this is this moment when he comes back to, God restores his mind in verse 34 of Daniel chapter 4. And it says this is Nebuchadnezzar. He says, at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me. And I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing. And he does according to his will among the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say to him, what have you done? So what was this revelation that Nebuchadnezzar got? He said, you know what? My reason returned to me, and I realized that God is God, and he can do whatever he wants to, in heaven or on earth. It says, all the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing. They hold no weight before God. Think about this. Is the God that you serve that big over everything? See, and so this is why I say this is so important, because think about it. We don't serve a God who only works in Riesel if everything is all right and he doesn't really know what's going on. He can't really see when these things happen. It's a God who controls all things. See, that's the God. We have to understand the magnitude of God. It says that he does whatever he wants to. That no one can say, whoa, what are you doing? And if you want an interesting story about that, Job 31, Job decides that God may have made a mistake. And so Job was just like, God, I've been thinking about it. Because, he was struck with all types of unpleasant things. He lost his family, lost his wealth, lost his house, lost everything. Satan was attacking him. He felt as though God was attacking him. And so he said, you know what, God, I think you made a mistake. I'm righteous. This stuff should happen to the bad guys. I'm right. Maybe you should relook at this. And so God, for about 3 chapters in Job, is just like, where were you when I told the oceans this far and no further? Where were you when I sent the snow out? Where were you when I told the sun to stay here? Where were you when and he names off all of these things. And so what he was telling Job is, hey, you don't even understand. You're just a speck in all that I control. I've made no mistake. And so he talks to Job for a chapter or 2, and then Job, it says he covers his mouth and he's just like, God, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. And God's like, no, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. And so God names off more. Because we, as humans, have a tendency to think that we are at the top of the food chain. We have this tendency to think that we have things under control. And God says, hey, you know what? It's all mine.